Imagine yourself on an ordinary day, crossing paths with someone who clearly needs help. Would you hesitate, or would you walk on without looking back? This was exactly the decision a young woman had to make when she encountered a stranger going through a difficult time. She didn't know his name, his story, or the reason for the pain he carried, but something within her chose to help. What she didn't realize, however, was that this simple, selfless gesture would change her life forever. Days later he returned, and when he returned, he brought with him a surprise that no one could have expected. Want to know what happened? Stay until the end. It was late afternoon, and Julia was on her way home after another exhausting day at the office. As she walked through the downtown streets, she noticed a man sitting on a bench, his shoulders slumped and his gaze fixed on the ground. He looked lost, desolate, as if the weight of the world rested upon him. Julia felt an inexplicable urge to approach. Something inside her told her he needed help. For a moment she hesitated, wondering if she should really get involved, but as she looked again at the stranger, she felt that something greater was calling her. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hi, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and hesitant. The man looked up slowly, revealing a face marked by exhaustion and what seemed to be recent tears. He took a deep breath, surprised that someone had noticed his pain. "I'm sorry, I'm just going through a tough time," he replied, trying to disguise the tremor in his voice. Julia sat beside him, unhurried and without judgment, ready to listen to whatever he wanted to share. Between pauses and halting words, the man, who introduced himself as Daniel, revealed that he had lost his job, and with it, the hope of keeping his small apartment. His family was far away, and he didn't want to worry them, but the weight of bills and lack of prospects were draining his strength. Julia listened to every word attentively, feeling a knot tighten in her throat. She knew how hard it was to feel alone, with no one to share the burden of struggles. On an impulse, Julia reached into her purse and pulled out a small amount of cash. "Please take this. It's not much, but maybe it can help you with something today," she said, offering the money with an encouraging smile. Daniel looked at her with surprise and at the same time an expression of deep gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he murmured, visibly moved. She smiled again, saying there was no need to thank her, only to promise that he wouldn't give up. After that encounter, Julia returned home feeling light, believing she had done something important. She didn't imagine that the gesture would mean so much, but she felt that Daniel had found some comfort in that moment. However, as the days passed, the memory of that stranger gradually faded, lost amid daily concerns and the rush of work. A few weeks later, Julia was fully absorbed in her routine. Then, on a rainy morning, she received an unexpected envelope on her desk at work. There was no sender, only her name written by hand in careful handwriting. Intrigued, she opened the envelope and found a letter. As she read the first lines, her heart began to beat faster. It was a message from Daniel. In the letter, Daniel expressed deep gratitude for Julia's act of kindness. He described how her help had given him the strength to carry on. After that day, he found the courage to seek assistance and managed to get a temporary job that was helping him get back on his feet. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "I will never forget what you did for me, and I promise, when you least expect it, I will repay you." Julia was both moved and intrigued. The letter was touching, but that promise of repayment made her curious. After all, what could Daniel do to repay something so simple? But over time, routine took over again, and the letter was tucked away in a drawer, along with other forgotten papers. Months later, on her birthday, Julia received another surprise. She was called to the lobby of her building, where a delivery person was waiting with a large bouquet of flowers and an envelope. Curious and surprised, she opened the envelope and once again found a message from Daniel. He had secured a new, stable job and had even earned a promotion. With his first paycheck, he decided to do something special for the woman who had reached out to him when no one else had. The flowers were accompanied by an invitation to dinner at an elegant restaurant, something Julia would never have imagined from a simple, casual encounter with a stranger. The gesture touched her deeply. She felt that this act was more than mere repayment. It was proof that small actions can transform lives and that sometimes a selfless act of kindness can return in unimaginable ways. On the night of the dinner, Julia was both excited and a little uncertain. She wondered how Daniel would be after so many months and if the invitation was truly appropriate. Upon arriving at the restaurant, she was greeted by a waiter who led her to a reserved table adorned with flowers and candles. As soon as she settled in, she saw Daniel approaching. He looked noticeably different. He was wearing well-kept clothes and had a confident expression that hadn't been there before. The smile on his face showed just how much his life had changed. The conversation flowed naturally. They talked about the ups and downs of the past few months, and Daniel explained how Julia's small act had given him hope. During the dinner, Julia noticed another woman at a nearby table watching them closely. At one point, the woman approached and politely interrupted their conversation. "Sorry, I'm Anna, a longtime friend of Daniel's. He spoke so much about you that I wanted to come over and meet you." Anna was a kind and outgoing woman with a contagious energy that immediately broke any formality among them. She began telling funny stories about Daniel's early days in his new job. "He'd show up with his tie all crooked in the first few days," she said, laughing, while Daniel rolled his eyes in embarrassment. Anna's presence brought a light-hearted atmosphere to the evening, making Julia feel more at ease and even more touched by the friendship and loyalty they shared. As the night went on, Anna revealed that she had been the first to support Daniel when he started his new job. When he felt discouraged, she was there to remind him of his capabilities. "I didn't even know about how you helped him," Anna told Julia, "but now I understand why he always spoke with such gratitude about a mysterious friend." Anna gave Daniel a knowing look, and he smiled, a bit shy but clearly moved. After dinner, Daniel thanked Julia once again, saying he didn't know how he could ever repay her for what she had done. She smiled and told him that he didn't owe her anything. She just wished him well. But Daniel seemed determined to express his gratitude in a special way. "There's one last surprise for you," he said, inviting her and Anna to walk with him to a nearby square. When they arrived, Julia was surprised to see a small group of musicians waiting with their instruments. "This is the least I could do to give back," said Daniel with a hopeful smile. The group began to play a gentle tune, and the square, which had been empty, started to attract curious glances from passers-by. Julia felt tears welling up as she sensed the care and effort that went into this moment. As the music played, Anna looked at Julia and said with a sincere expression, "Not everyone would have done what you did, you know. Even without knowing him, you reached out and gave him a new beginning. I see it every day in his work." Julia smiled, realizing that this encounter hadn't been a mere coincidence. It felt as if they were all there for a greater purpose, something that connected them in a story of transformation. When the night finally came to an end, Daniel handed Julia a small envelope. "Inside is my real gift to you, something I think will mean a lot." When she opened the envelope, she found a photograph of the two of them in the square, taken discreetly by Anna, and a note that read, "So you never forget the power of a good deed." With her heart filled with emotion, Julia realized that this was more than just a simple photo. It was an eternal reminder of how a small act of kindness can impact lives in unimaginable ways. She embraced Daniel and Anna, feeling that she now had not only cherished memories, but also new friends, bound by a story that would transform all of them. In the days that followed, Julia and Daniel stayed in touch, and together with Anna, they began to meet regularly. Soon, that circle of friendship expanded, with each of them bringing stories and new faces to the gatherings. That unlikely group of friends became a true family, where support and loyalty were the cornerstones. Julia never again doubted the value of a kind gesture, and every time she saw someone in need, she remembered Daniel and the transformation she had witnessed. As the months passed, the bond between Julia, Daniel, and Anna grew stronger. They started meeting weekly, each gathering marked by laughter, stories, and plans for the future. However, as the friendship deepened, Julia began to sense that there was something Daniel had yet to share. Despite his constant joy and gratitude, there were moments when he seemed distant, his gaze lost, as if he were reliving something painful. One evening during a gathering at Anna's apartment, she finally decided to ask, "Daniel, I know you've been through a lot, but is there something more, something you're still carrying?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding between trusting her or keeping that secret to himself. Taking a deep breath, Daniel began to speak, his voice low and hesitant, revealing a past that Julia and Anna would never have imagined. Daniel shared that, besides losing his job and almost his home, he had a younger brother, Marcos, who had been in prison for over 2 years. Since their parents passed away, Daniel felt responsible for him and tried to help him in every way he could. However, Marcos's attempts to leave a life of crime always failed, and Daniel carried immense pain and guilt for never being able to pull him out of that life. Hearing his story, Julia felt a mix of sadness and compassion for Daniel. She had never imagined the burden he carried, hidden behind that resilient smile. In that moment, she promised herself she would stand by him, no matter what. But the revelation also brought new tensions to the group, as Anna, who had always been very close to Daniel, felt a twinge of insecurity about this new friendship. The following months brought new challenges. During one of Daniel's visits to Marcos in prison, his brother pleaded for help, saying he had become entangled in a dangerous debt inside. Desperate, Daniel decided to ask Julia and Anna for assistance, and they immediately agreed to help him raise the money. Julia even offered part of her savings, but Anna hesitated, worried about the safety and risks the situation might entail. Anna and Julia began to disagree on the best way to help Daniel. Anna thought that paying off Marcos's debt would only perpetuate a cycle, while Julia believed he deserved a chance to start over. Tension between the two grew, and Daniel, seeing his friends divided because of him, began to question whether he'd done the right thing by sharing his problem. One night, Julia and Anna met for a candid conversation. In a cozy restaurant with dim lights and soft background music, Anna opened up. "I just want to protect him. I feel like he's getting into something way too dangerous." Julia, on the other hand, insisted that Daniel needed support and people who believed in him, especially when everything seemed to be going wrong. After a long conversation, the two finally understood that, despite their differences, they wanted the same thing: to see Daniel happy and safe. Their reconciliation brought new strength to the group, and together they decided to help Daniel in a safer, more thoughtful way. Daniel, moved by the support he received, promised to be cautious and said he was determined to rescue both his brother and himself from this dark past. They devised a plan to talk to a lawyer, someone who could help reduce Marcos's sentence and offer an alternative for his reintegration. The following week, the group met with the lawyer Anna had recommended, a serious and experienced man who understood the system well. He took on the case, and together they began working on a strategy to help Marcos. The weeks that followed were intense, filled with hopes and twists. Daniel seemed more determined than ever, and for the first time, Julia saw a genuine spark of hope in his eyes. Finally, after months of effort and anticipation, Marcos received a reduced sentence and the promise of a transfer to a rehabilitation program. On the night they received the news, Julia, Daniel, and Anna met again to celebrate, feeling that they had won a battle together. With tears in his eyes, Daniel thanked his two friends. "You're not just my friends, you're my family, and I'll never forget what you've done for me and my brother." That night, Julia realized just how much the cycle of kindness had transformed everyone. The selfless gesture she had made long ago had not only changed Daniel's life, but also her own, creating deep and genuine bonds with people she would never have met otherwise. She, Anna, and Daniel had built something solid and special, united by a story of overcoming and love for others. A few months after the victory of reducing Marcos's sentence, the lives of Daniel, Julia, and Anna settled into a new routine. Daniel, now with a lighter heart, dedicated himself to his work with even more commitment, and each of his achievements became a reason for the group to celebrate. Their relationship had strengthened to the point that they had become confidants and partners in every step of their lives. The success they had achieved together seemed like a true miracle to Daniel, who had never imagined having such a strong support network. However, despite the victories, there was still tension in the air. Marcos, now in a rehabilitation program, was struggling to adjust. Daniel frequently received calls from his brother, who complained about the environment and the people around him. He insisted he was trying, but the weight of his past was still a heavy burden to carry. Torn between empathy for his brother and the fear of seeing him relapse, Daniel began to feel the emotional toll of the situation. In one of these conversations with Marcos, Daniel realized that his brother was close to giving up. Feeling desperation rise, he decided to share his concerns with Julia and Anna. They listened intently and suggested that he encourage Marcos to find an activity that could keep him motivated, perhaps a way to express everything he had been through. Maybe something like writing or painting, something that lets him channel this energy outside of himself, Anna suggested in an encouraging tone. Daniel took the idea seriously, and on his next visit to the rehabilitation program, he talked to Marcos about the possibility of exploring creative activities. To his surprise, Marcos showed interest in the idea of writing. He confessed that he had always wanted to put his feelings into words, but never believed anyone would care about his story. Daniel encouraged him, assuring him that he had a unique voice and that his story was important. A few weeks later, Marcos sent Daniel the first pages of his memoir, written with brutal honesty about the struggles and regrets he carried with him. Daniel read the text, moved, realizing the depth of the pain his brother had carried in silence. He showed the manuscript to Julia and Anna, who were equally impressed. Anna, who had always been passionate about literature, suggested that Marcos continue writing and that perhaps he could turn it into a book. This idea gave new meaning to Marcos's recovery, as he began to see writing as a way of redemption and perhaps even reconciliation with the past. Julia, moved by the transformation, suggested they try to help Marcos publish his work once he finished it. "It could be a chance to inspire others not to give up," she said enthusiastically. Daniel agreed, touched by the thought of seeing his brother reborn through his own story. While Marcos worked on his writing, the group continued to meet, and each of their lives seemed to blossom with new opportunities. Julia received an important promotion at work, while Anna decided to pursue her long-held dream of opening a small bookstore cafe, with the help of friends who believed in the potential of the business. Inspired by the changes around him, Daniel also began to consider a new direction for his life. At one of their gatherings, Daniel shared with the group that he was thinking of creating a non-profit organization to help people in situations similar to the one he had faced. offering emotional, professional, and even financial support to those on the brink of giving up. He believed that with the right support, he could help many find a second chance. Anna and Julia were impressed by the initiative and offered to help however they could. They were excited by the idea of working on something that could transform lives. With the support of his friends, Daniel began planning the first steps to establish the non-profit, which he named Helping Hand. The name reflected the simple yet powerful gesture that Julia had made in the past, which had changed his entire trajectory. Each of them contributed their skills. Anna helped with outreach and networking, while Julia used her professional experience to organize the financial and legal structure of the organization. At an emotional opening ceremony, Daniel invited friends, co-workers, and family to learn about the project. The highlight of the night was when Marcos, still in recovery, read a passage from his book, moving everyone in attendance. His words were a mix of pain and hope, echoing in the minds of the guests as a call for change and resilience. The applause was unanimous, and Daniel felt that this moment marked a new chapter not only for him, but for everyone who had believed in him and his brother. From that day on, Helping Hand began to assist dozens of people. Daniel, Julia, and Anna dedicated themselves wholeheartedly, driven by the certainty that each story they encountered was valuable and deserved a dignified ending. Each small success was celebrated, and every challenge was faced with the strength of the group, which now functioned as a true family. In the end, Julia realized that her unexpected encounter with Daniel long ago had changed not only his life but also her own, transforming her world and bringing her purpose and true friendship. As they headed home, Julia thought about how sometimes life's best gifts come disguised as challenges and difficulties, and she knew with all certainty that it is always worth reaching out to someone in a difficult moment, for the reward in the end is something none of them could have predicted. Years passed, and the work at Helping Hand grew in extraordinary ways. What began as a simple desire to help people in hardship was now a respected organization in the city, with support programs for young people and adults who, like Daniel once did, found themselves on the brink of despair. Julia, Daniel, and Anna had become the pillars of this initiative, inspiring not only their local community, but also gaining national recognition for the positive impact they were having on people's lives. With the growth of the non-profit, new challenges arose. They had to learn about resource management, fundraising campaigns, and ways to mobilize volunteers. Despite the difficulties, everyone's dedication never wavered. Marcos, now fully rehabilitated and with his book published, became one of the main ambassadors of Helping Hand, sharing his story in lectures and events, helping to inspire others to choose new paths. He also grew closer to Daniel, strengthening their bond as brothers and replacing guilt with pride in a journey of overcoming. One night, during a celebration of the non-profit's anniversary, Anna, with laughter and an emotional smile, announced that she was engaged. She had reconnected with an old college friend at a charity event, and over the months, romance had blossomed. Julia and Daniel were the first to congratulate her, and as they toasted to Anna's happiness, Julia felt something stir within herself, a strong, warm feeling as she looked at Daniel. It was something that had been growing quietly, and now, in that moment of joy, it became impossible to ignore. Daniel, as if reading Julia's thoughts, gave a shy smile and pulled her up to dance. They both laughed, a bit awkward at first, but soon found their rhythm, feeling a new, indescribable energy flow between them. That moment felt magical, and time seemed to stand still around them. In that embrace, Julia realized that their friendship had transformed into something much deeper. With his eyes shining, Daniel confessed softly that he would never have made it this far without her. From that day on, Julia and Daniel's relationship blossomed. Their love was built not only on affection, but on a foundation of friendship and trust that few couples experience. Together, they discovered the joys and challenges of being with someone who understood the deepest parts of their soul. And, as they had always done, they faced new challenges together, merging their work with the non-profit and their personal lives. Their wedding was an emotional celebration filled with friends and those who had been touched by helping hand. Marcos, now a completely transformed man, was responsible for bringing the rings to the altar with a joy that moved everyone. Anna, now expecting her first child, was the maid of honor, smiling proudly at the couple she loved so dearly. During the ceremony, Julia and Daniel exchanged vows filled with gratitude, promising to stand by each other no matter what the future might bring. Julia and Daniel's happiness only grew, and they continued to transform lives through the work they had built together. Over time, they opened new branches of the non-profit in other cities, expanding the project's reach. Each success story of someone finding the strength to start over brought a sense of fulfillment and confirmation that despite the challenges, every step had been worth it. They saw in the faces of others the same hope that Julia had once offered to Daniel. The years were generous to them. Julia and Daniel had 2 children who grew up surrounded by inspiring stories and their parents' example of kindness. The children spent their childhood accompanying the work of the non-profit, learning compassion and empathy from an early age. For Julia and Daniel, this was the most important thing, teaching their children the value of helping others, something they knew would guide them throughout their lives. One night, revisiting the place where it all began, the park bench where Julia and Daniel had first met, they sat together, recalling every step of their journey. They looked at the bench as if they could see their younger selves sitting there with the uncertainty and hope of those who have yet to discover the future. Julia took Daniel's hand and whispered, "Who would have thought that everything would begin here with a simple act of kindness?" Daniel smiled, his eyes bright. "Sometimes the simplest things change entire lives, Julia, and you changed mine." He kissed her hand, grateful for that moment that had led them to everything they had built together. The park bench, once just an ordinary seat, was now a symbol of the love and friendship they had created and of all the lives they had touched over the years. And so, as night fell around them, Julia and Daniel said goodbye to that place with the certainty that their legacy would continue with helping hand, assisting new faces and new stories, and with the love they had discovered, simple, deep, and transformative, lighting not only their path but the paths of everyone lucky enough to cross theirs.